My name's Christine. I'm the convener of the Socialist Disability Group, which used to be the Labour Disability Group, but quite a lot of us have been chucked out of Labour, so we changed the name to what is nearer to our hearts, which is the Socialist Disability Group. We called the meeting Shafted because that's basically what's happened to disabled people through history, and particularly in the last few years with the current government. So those are the kind of things that we're looking at. And we're having several speakers. The main speaker will be Paula Peters of DPAC, which is Disabled People Against the Cuts, who are very active in disability campaigning. Our first speaker is Rory Heap of Unite Community, who's going to talk about the political background to this. And then after Paula, some of the members of our group will be talking about their particular problems with disability. The idea of this meeting is awareness raising and showing people how they can support the disabled members of their CLP or their trade unions or their groups, and networking people so we can share information and share reports of activism. So I'm going to hand over now to Rory. If you could unmute yourself, please. And
I think I am. Yeah. Thank you, Christine, and hello, everyone. Some people here do know me, and other people don't. My real role in this meeting is actually Paula Peters' warm-up artist, is what I really am. And I'm very pleased to be Paula's warm-up person. The only other person of anything like the same fame and grandeur that I've ever warmed up for was Dennis Skinner in the 80s, and that was a long time ago, and is completely another story. But the reason why it was important to have a lead into whatever Paula says is because we have to set the struggle that disabled people are having, whether it's to do with housing or poverty or universal credit or whatever the fuck it is because we exist in a political context and in a political vacuum, an increasingly serious political vacuum. And I want to talk a little bit about that before Paula speaks. What do I mean by a political vacuum? Well, some of you will have seen, and if you haven't, you really must see the film Then Barbara Met Alan, which was broadcast on BBC Two last Monday. And the reason why it's a must-see is because it's a reminder of what it took and the sort of attitudes and energy and leadership it took to mount the movement that led to the passage of the Disability Discrimination Act, which became, for better or worse, the Equalities Act 2010. We tend to forget that was not an act of beneficence by the Tory party, although I'm sure they like to think it was. It was actually a huge victory on behalf of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of disabled people getting out on the streets, blocking roads, chaining themselves to buses, occupying the parliament, all sorts of activities that took place over a whole period of time, probably from it stems from the activities of the Union of Physically Impaired Against Segregation back in the early 70s. And that led to the development of the social model of disability, which people talk about and say they've adopted, but don't know what the hell they're talking about, and they don't know what it is. And I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail about the social model because academics have written books about it by the hundred. People have fought over it. People have disagreed about it. But it is fundamental to the concept of the political place of the political struggle of disabled people for the right to live normal lives in this society. My suggestion to you is that the reason why this is relevant to anything that calls itself the socialist disability group is because it is not possible to achieve equality or even to step on the road towards equality without embracing the idea of socialism. You cannot deliver disability equality through or under capitalism. There has to be a transformation of the relationship between people, in this case, disabled people and society, for that to be able to happen. It cannot be delivered through charity. You know, the message of Barbara Lizicki and Alan Holdsworth and all of us who were ranting around the streets at that time was piss on pity. And it's one of the best slogans we've ever had. And it made the police try and stop people demonstrating with that poster, with that slogan. But we do not need pity. Pity will not get us where we need to go. Struggle and change and people realizing that we are disabled by the society that we live in because it does not organize itself in any way which meets our needs, whether that's access or income or anything else. So we have to return to the fundamentals because we've all been diverted. We've been diverted into human rights. We've been diverted into being service providers. We've been diverted into relying on charities. You know, food banks have become an accepted norm in our society. How much of a degradation is that for people's dignity? And disabled people are still in that situation in most of the situations in which we find ourselves, and we do it to each other. You know, we end up having conversations, circular conversations about how awful our lives are because we have to, because nobody else is listening to us. But what we really have to do, and this is why disabled people against the cuts and what Paula will have to say is so important, because it's the most significant active national group of disabled people involved in political struggle at the moment. So whatever, and I know that I'm talking to the converted here, but I really think it's important that we are not afraid to take an aggressively political message into the world which we occupy. People like us, people like the GRT community particularly, are being forgotten. We are the disappeared. We get left off lists. We get forgotten about when people are talking about oppression. We get forgotten about when it comes to people thinking that it's possible to make a difference with us. And we get forgotten when we're included by the left in concepts of socialist and class struggle. So we have to remind non-disabled people very forcefully that we exist, we will not be forgotten, and we will not have things being done in our name. We need to reinvent and re-borrow the slogan that we had in the 90s, that we borrowed from the Black Civil Rights Movement, which is nothing about us without us. We have to be involved in the things that people think are good for us. That if we're not, then it's a medical proposition. We need a radical, transformative, socialist disability agenda, and we need it to conform to and abide by and learn from the social model of disability. So, and we have to remember that everything makes a difference. Alan Holdsworth said, and I will end on this, Alan Holdsworth said in the film twice, he said, whatever we do will be a start and it will never be enough. We always will need to do more, but starting is a good place to be, and recognizing that we'll always have further to go is one of the things that we have to live with and fight with. So that's all I've got to say, and I hope that sets what Paula has to say in the right agenda.
Thank you very much, Rory. Let's go to Paula, who is our star speaker. And I'm really sorry, Paula, that the technology went a bit wrong trying to let you in. That is one of the issues of disability in meetings, is access, and that's something that we really have to get right in our own meetings. So thanks very much, Paula.
Christine, thank you. We got there in the end, but Christine, thank you so much to you and everyone for having me speak tonight. Rory, I wouldn't say I'm famous at all. I think, going with, Direct Action Network, who I have to say are regrouping. I was on a reunion protest with them last Friday, so, look forward to seeing them back out on the street. However, we're having the chat with them at the moment. We are in a totally different political climate to what Dan had to deal with 30 years ago, and we are in a totally different style of oppression. Well, the oppression's the same, but unfortunately the rights that Dan fought for have been horrendously eroded over the last 12 years. We've seen the closure of the Independent Living Fund, and disabled people with high support needs who need social care are having constant reassessments for their social care packages. After the first year of when the ILF closed, which was back in 2015, over 60% of disabled people who had ILF support, and that's 22,000 disabled people who had ILF funding, over 60% saw cuts to their social care packages. And I think that's really, really important to stress that. And we saw during the pandemic, the horrendous situation that we've been through, that, local authorities used the Care Act of 2014 and easements under the Act to cut disabled people's social care even further. When it was needed the most, the government gave local authorities the permission to cut social care even further. And it's getting increasingly difficult to get access to social care and, the supports and everything that you need. And for DPAC perspective, we are actually having now, and you're seeing it more and more often online, we're having to fundraise for basic equipment. We're having to fundraise for power wheelchairs, for adaptions. And also, we get inundated with disabled people needing support with help for ESA, for PIP applications, all of which are going online. And it's got to be said that over a fifth of the 14 million disabled people in the UK don't have access to the internet, do not have the access needs to use it, cannot afford broadband and everything like that. And with everything moving online, it's another barrier which is excluding disabled people. And it's got to be said with the NHS, the last week or so, that primary care, they're now wanting all of us to use an app that we're going to be having to use to contact our GPs with. And we're going to have to book our appointments and our medications and everything via this app. And they want to go over to this computerized system with this app by 2024. Now, I don't know about any of you. I struggle with technology, even though I've got assistive technology. I struggle with apps and everything anyway, and I get myself in such a muddle with them. And I know a lot of disabled people do too. It's getting harder and harder and harder to get GP appointments. And let me say this, it's deliberate to bring in sweeping privatisation of the NHS, but it's also about the denial of treatment. And what we're going to see in June is what is called the integrated care systems, which are going to be coming out across England. And you're going to be seeing the joining up of NHS and social care into one system. but what it means overall for the NHS, and it's really important to stress this, and we have been seeing it, but we're going to be seeing a ramping up of it. It is about de-skilling of health professionals. It's about cuts to provision, and it's about rationalisation of treatment, denial of treatment. And if you're on a waiting list, it's about trying to push you over to pay in private, which of course disabled people and many cannot do. So it's long waiting lines for treatment, and it's about the Americanization of healthcare, which is an absolute disastrous model, one that we've been fighting back for many years, and we are seeing a lot more of American companies on health boards and everything like that, and which is an absolute disastrous way to go. So you need to look for the NHS app and articles about it. I'll try and find a couple and send across. But I also campaign around the NHS, something that I've been involved with campaigning since the age of 8, when I campaigned to save our local hydrotherapy pool. And it's something, my family have given 70 years service to the NHS as staff members and everything like that. What we're seeing with this government, I don't know if any of you, some of you may have read my Solidarity Sisters, Ellen Clifford's award-winning book, The War on Disabled People. And let's be clear on this point, that's exactly what we're in with this government. The cuts that we've been experiencing and the erosion of our rights is an ideological attack on us. Okay, they came after us pretty much first. We have borne the brunt of austerity cuts. We have borne the brunt of the horrendous problems we've had with the pandemic. And we need to be clear with the wider left when they keep talking about a recent cost of living crisis. This cost of living situation that we're in is not new. We have for decades borne the brunt of increasing privatization, which has ramped up all of our energy costs and all the utilities that we use. We're sweeping privatization with Margaret Thatcher, but we have had year on year cost of living rises. Obviously, we've endured several years of benefit freezes, which have had a detrimental impact on disabled people, not being able to afford to heat or eat. We're in the position now as disabled people where we are barely surviving or dying. Now, a few weeks ago, the government brought in, I don't know if some of you have heard of it, and there was a big fury online. There was a consultation which the government kept quiet, but the Mirror broke the story that you know of the warm home discount, that you get £140 at the beginning of October to help with energy costs during the winter. The government have decided to cut that for 200,000 disabled people. So if you get PIP or DLA or older people for attendance allowance, you're in the higher income bracket. So say if you're working, or you've got a partner working, or you've got other forms of income, you're going to find you're not going to be able to qualify for warm home discount from October. The same day as the energy price cap will rise again. And they're talking at the end of the year that energy costs, you're going to be looking at an average person's energy costs of about £3,000 to £4,000 a year, which for disabled people already in a position of being in debt with many energy companies, already unable to afford the cap coming in next week, it's going to have a catastrophic impact on disabled people's lives. Now, we are mounting cost of living campaigns at the moment. Next week, we're supporting Sheffield DPAC with a campaign called The Big Power Off, Take the Power Back. So basically, we're asking our allies and everything, if they can, and we know that a lot of disabled people can't, to reduce their energy consumption on the 1st of April when the price increases come in, or if people can switch off appliances and everything that they use to, you know, show solidarity with the campaign, or just share the links that Sheffield DPAC have around with your allies and fellow socialists so that they can support the campaign. And the one thing I think that DPAC has been very successful with is we know there are many disabled people who simply cannot get out on the street to protest. We are very, we actually do an awful lot of work online on Facebook and on Twitter and, you know, by email, but we also do an awful lot of talking online as well. We try to make our actions as inclusive as possible, but we also reach out to disabled people via other networks to for them to be able to share, to get other allies to share their stories with us via our email account to get personal testimonies. And the personal testimonies that we collect were instrumental in the evidence that we gave to the United Nations Conventions of the Rights of Disabled People. We have literally just submitted the third report that has gone in, which you've probably seen was released on Tuesday. And the outcome from that report is, and the overwhelming message in that report, from the report that was submitted in 2017, when the convention ruled that the cuts were catastrophic on disabled people's lives and were a human catastrophe, were right, the overwhelming theme through the report was that disabled people are expendable. And what Direct Action Network's message on last Friday, when they went to the Department of Health and Social Care to demand an independent inquiry into the COVID deaths during the pandemic, which, as all of you have seen, 6 out of 10 coronavirus deaths have been that of disabled people. And that's really important to stress that. But also, I think it's important that we talk about the Coronavirus Act, that heinous piece of legislation they brought in at the start of the pandemic, where, say, if you're in mental distress, they actually brought in where you were only sectioned with one doctor and not two. So they just brought in the one, you know, took away one healthcare professional, and they used the pandemic as a way to put do not resuscitate on thousands of disabled people's medical records without their knowledge and without their consent. And I think that is really important to stress that. And if you were in the 18 to 30 age group and you had a learning impairment, you were 18 times more likely to die from coronavirus than that of a non-disabled person in the same age group. And it's important that we remember every disabled person that is no longer with us today, who were denied access to vital medical equipment during the pandemic, who couldn't get access to an ICU bed, to a ventilator and the support they needed. They termed us expendable, and we are not. Now, for me, I mean, you know, in the early 90s, I was hospitalized an awful lot into the psychiatric system. What's happening to our mental health system is an absolute travesty. We've seen decades and decades of underfunding from subsequent governments. Let's be clear on that point. We've seen the removal of, you know, really great day centres. We've seen the removal of day hospitals and supportive networks that really supported people in mental distress. But we have seen the ramping up of compliance with compulsory treatment orders and the overusing of the Mental Health Act and the horrendous use of big pharma. But we've also seen many people in mental distress being thrown away from the mental health system and left with no support from primary care, because it just simply isn't there. And it's got to be said that only 10% of GPs have mental health training, including suicide, awareness prevention, and many of them have training to deal with psychiatric medication. You know, you're only under a mental health team now if you have clozapine, which is called a black box medication in primary care. That is the only reason that you stay under a mental health team. Now, for many people who need support in medical evidence for ESA, the work capability assessment under universal credit, it's getting harder and harder to get that supporting evidence when you're not under secondary services, and that plays an overwhelming part in a lot of personal independence PIP decisions. We are seeing that they are actually downgrading people's awards if they're not under secondary care, because they're saying, well, you can't be in mental distress because you're not under secondary care, and you can't have support with social situations because you're not under secondary care. Well, you know, we have enduring mental distress and trauma, and we need support with everyday life, and we need, you know, that's, you know, support from doctors, but it's getting harder and harder to get. And also GPs charge for medical letters, and when you haven't got the money, that often impacts on you able to get support. We've also seen recently with a lot of ESA and PIP tribunals that the appeal decisions have actually been rejected, because a lot of appeals have actually on telephone and not face to face. And what the DWP are very upset about is the high number of people in the support group of ESA, and that is something that they want to tweak with the descriptors. And also they're very unhappy with the high number of people in mental distress getting awards. We're also seeing now with the job centres the ramping up of the hostile environment. You may have seen online just recently where they are targeting people to come in for job centre interviews, weekly interviews, which have been incredibly stressful for claimants, to push them back into work. And they are really ramping that up against people in mental distress. Now, we warned several years ago when they were coming out with the buzzwords, work is a health outcome, which is something the NHS like to use, the joint co-productive working of the DWP and the NHS. We are seeing job coaches now going into GP surgeries, but we're really seeing the ramping up of the push of getting disabled people back into work, which is causing dreadful distress. The thing is what do we do about all of this? What is important is we've got to know what our rights are around the benefit system, getting the support to fill the forms out correctly and submitting that evidence. The only, with welfare rights advice centres disappearing at a rate of knots and community law centres, it's getting very difficult to get access to justice through the courts, with the limited access to judicial reviews as well. But it's so important that we put in touch with people, those who are very clever, clever of how to get access to the right information to fill out forms. And there's some brilliant benefit support groups on Facebook that I think I've shared with Christine in the past, who keep up to date with the current regulations and all the benefits and work guidelines, including some that activists have written themselves to help other claimants. And those are so important. But we're seeing with PIP now that the form has now gone online. So if you've got an email, they want you to actually go online and fill out the application online. It's knowing about what your rights are, how to fill out these questionnaires, and also getting the support. And that is what has been vital through the past 12 years with disabled people. It's been showing solidarity to one another and getting the right information and the right support. The problem is we're finding now we are inundated every day with disabled people desperate for support to fill out these forms. And often disabled people have literally gone through one assessment, got their award, and not even getting an 18 months breathing space before they're put through it again. And you may have seen Rethink are actually launched their campaign calling for an inquiry into the benefit deaths. That is something that we seriously need to hold this government to account on. The dreadful harm and distress that PIP, ESA and Universal Credit is putting disabled people through. It's causing untold harm, it's causing untold distress, and sadly We've lost people in mental distress who've taken their own lives as a result. Each name is etched in our hearts and minds. And what Alan said, you know, in the film, you know, when Barbara met Alan, we do have more to go. We do have more to do. The thing is, we're being oppressed, we're being discriminated against. This government has ramped up the hostile environment. But what they've also done with the police and crime bill and putting in the anti-protest laws, they're making it harder and harder and harder for us to fight back on the street, but also fight back online. Now, that bill is not yet law. It's ping-ponging between the House of Commons and also the House of Lords at the moment. But you can bet your bottom dollar on this one. The government are going to do everything they can to stop the criticism of them and stop us fighting back. We're going to have to be clever. We're going to have to think out of the box to make sure disabled people's voices are heard going forwards, but also continue the fight for our rights, not only for us, but also for disabled people who come after us. Because we're not only fighting for us today, we're fighting for everyone who comes after us. But also we need younger people to come into the movement, because we're all getting older and we're not going to be able to do this forever. So I'm interested to hear what all of you got to say. It's a brief overview of what I've said. So sorry if I've waffled on too much, but I want to hear from all of you. That's part of the reason why I'm here. But I guarantee you this, you know, Deepak are still here. We're still fighting back. Dan are re-emerging. They're going to be fighting back. But it's important to join these fights together. We need a unified mass resistance movement to push this fucking government back. And the only way we can do that is showing solidarity to one another. And that is our strength. Solidarity, all of you. Thank you for having me on tonight.
Thank you very much, Paula. That's absolutely brilliant. There are several people with their hands up. Can I ask you to wait until we get through the list of people that have already are already going to speak from our group, because we're trying to cover a range of different disabilities. I can see someone with their hand up who's on the same waiting list as me for the same hospital, for maybe the same surgeon, but I'll call you in later, John. Paul, I know exactly what you mean about the hostile environment, and it's been making me a bit sick when you see footage from the Ukraine of old ladies in wheelchairs and people with sticks being helped over rubble, and people being very sympathetic. And I think, well, there's probably somebody in your street that is also in a wheelchair and also struggling with a hostile environment. You know, go and seek them out if you're feeling that sympathetic. You know, look after the disabled people that are next door, and, you know, stop the hostile environment for them. The next person to speak is Jenny Almeida, who's going to talk about the work capability assessment. So I'll hand over to you, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I've been waiting a long time to speak about the work capability assessment and how it affected my son, and how it was in 2011, my son was seriously ill and he got 0 points and all his money was taken away. And if I hadn't been there, he would have died, basically. And I want to really explain to people who don't know what's the assessment is just totally flawed. And before it came in, the people who decided whether you were fit to work or not were your GP or your hospital consultant, who knew about you. And they did a sick note for you, which my son started out having, and then he had to go for the WCA. The test is totally flawed. It's not just the companies who are running it. And as a result, very physically and also mentally sick people are being judged fit to work when they are not capable of even fulfilling the tasks necessary to claim unemployment benefit, let alone hold down a job. As a result, they are left with no money and with no period to prepare when money is stopped. And many have died since this test was brought in. A large percentage appeal against the test results and win their appeal. And the old system of allowing the GPs and the consultants to decide if someone is fit to work would be fairer, less stressful, and much, much cheaper. You wouldn't need all these idiot people doing the test. The test judges you as fit for work if you can lift a carton of juice, walk with or without aids, answer a telephone, take a message, put on or take off a jacket, and other such criteria. I want everybody to please think back to when you were last off work with an illness such as flu or with an injury. You'd probably be able to lift a carton of juice. You'd be able to answer the telephone and talk to your parents or your son or daughter about how ill you were. You'd probably be able to walk to the toilet with or without aid, but you'd be far too ill to work. People with life-threatening illnesses, such as in my son's case, ulcerative colitis, people with cancer and many other conditions have been found fit to work. Their money is taken away, and if they're too ill, like my son was, to appeal, he needed me to help him appeal, they're going to die, basically, because they've got no money, no one to help them. Also, people with severe depression, schizophrenia, and other mental conditions are being found fit to work. I first became aware of this situation when my eldest son had just left university and been offered his first decent job. But he became suddenly very ill. He hadn't eaten for 9 days, and I had to take him to A&E. He turned out to have ulcerative colitis and was put on steroids. And after a week in hospital, he was discharged with ongoing steroid treatment. But he was still wasting away, even though he was now eating. And he had to have regular blood and iron transfusions to keep him alive. And then, because they weren't really working, immunosuppressants. He was very weak. He couldn't concentrate. He wasn't well enough to see or talk to friends. He didn't allow anyone to come around and see him because he just didn't have the energy to talk to them. He was getting thinner and thinner and had internal inflammation and bleeding. He managed to get to the local shop and back. There's no way he could have taken up his job, even though he wanted to do so. He wanted that job. When he applied for ESA, he got 0 points on the work capability assessment, and his money was stopped with no notice. The assessor said because he was having the blood transfusions, he'd be fine to go to work. I believe if I hadn't been there to support him, he would have died. And he would have died if he tried to go to work in that condition, being immunocompromised, wasting away. All his energy was going to try and keep him alive. I helped him to appeal, and several months later, he won his appeal. Though in the meantime, he had to have his whole colon removed to save his life, and he had a stoma for 6 months, and then a thing called a J pouch. So he's still a bit disabled, but he is working now because basically he had to go on to 0 hours contracts because, anyway, that's another story. I haven't got time to go through all that. But my youngest son has schizophrenia, which he developed in his GCSE year. He was in Guy's Hospital adolescent unit for a year, and then they found a medication which worked to end his psychosis and delusion, which is the clozapine that Paula mentioned. He was put on incapacity benefit, which again was decided by the GP and the consultants, the mental health consultants he was under, before the change to work capability assessment. But with this illness, his way of dealing with it is to ignore his diagnosis as much as possible. And when asked by the psychiatrist, even when he was slipping back into psychosis, he would always say, "I'm fine, I can do everything, I'm fine, I can lift a carton of juice, I can do work, I can do this." So he would never get any money, basically, with this test. Luckily, he's got a part-time job, but because he never had DLA, he can't get working tax credit as a part-time worker, because you've got to have had DLA in order to get money as a part-time worker. He lives with me, so lack of money is not such a problem. But if he was living independently, it very well could be very serious for him. Many people are left with no means of support when getting 0 points and will end up in hospital or at worst die of infection, starvation or suicide. This is nothing short of condemning people to death or worse illness. Criminals, even murderers, do not have food and shelter taken from them as a punishment. And yet totally innocent, sick people are having this done to them. They're being left with nothing. A person's GP or consultant is best placed to know if someone is fit to work, not faceless officials whose only rationale seems to be to not give to give people as least money as possible. The test is flawed and does not take into account fever, fatigue, pain, internal bleeding, only whether you can perform a simple task. Maybe you can make dinner for yourself. Maybe you can put your jacket on. Public money is being wasted on this dreadful test. It needs to be reversed now, and people need to listen. I've been trying since 2011, this happened to my son, and I've been trying to flag it up with newspapers, with anyone I can. And it's just carrying on. It's been over 10 years now, and it's just carrying on, although it's totally flawed and it costs loads of money with all the appeals. It's just totally irrational. And that's the end of what I've got to say. Thank you very much.
Very much, Jenny. I gave Jenny kind of double time because she had 2 stories to tell, and it's very heartbreaking stuff. So thanks very much. And the next person to speak is Vanda, who's going to talk about hidden disabilities. For 3 minutes, please.
I just wanted to add something to what Jenny said, that when people do bring this up, they say, oh, it's the claimant's fault for not filling the forms in properly, not getting enough medical evidence and all that kind of stuff. I'm seeing report after report, people go to these assessments, they get written reports afterwards, they don't recognize themselves because the assessors lie so much. They say that they can't walk, and the assessor tells them they can. It's totally made up, and the reason for it apparently is that they're all under some kind of target or whatever. I mean, it shouldn't be like that anyway. As for sort of hidden disabilities, that is a real problem, especially with these assessments, because what happens is that perhaps you're resting a few days beforehand, so you'll be well enough to get to the assessment. And of course, once you get there, you've got a bit of adrenaline that kicks in, and that to help you get through the thing. And then by the time you finish and you go home, you're absolutely devastated for days in end. And of course, that's not seen. You go to the assessment, and especially younger people who like to be made up and everything, that they look absolutely great. And that's another excuse they use for failing people. I did scribble down a few notes here because otherwise I lose track of the thing. Right, worst thing is people don't believe you. If you've got a leg missing or you're in a wheelchair or whatever, people can see that you're disabled. But like I said, if you go out and you're well enough to go out, and you look well, don't you? So like I say, so people don't believe it, they don't understand. And even if sometimes you explain and very politely and carefully, and that they forget. They forget that there's actually something wrong. And one of the worst things actually are some people in my local ME group. They're young women with children and husbands, and of course the husbands go out to work and they come back stressed, and they just don't understand that the wife just wasn't well enough to perhaps get the dinner or whatever, and that just adds. And if you add stress to this thing, you add to the problem. And people think that you're lazy and unhelpful and whatever, because they can't see that there's actually something wrong. And just one other point I wanted to make, that I just couldn't believe all this happened like sort of in 2009, 2010. So when we got to the 2015 election, I just couldn't believe that people still voted for the Tory government that created all of this cruelty. And I think one of the reasons for that is that people think that, and of course they think it because they're told it, that it's their taxpayers' money that pays for it all, and of course it isn't. So that's another point that I believe we really ought to try and put out to people. Our government does not use taxpayers' money to fund any kind of expenditure. We saw for the £37 billion that the Bank of England created for track and trace. So they didn't put people's taxes up to pay for that, did they? So I think that's a point that perhaps all of us ought to try and make and get through. It is starting to get through to people, but we need it to get through to millions and millions and millions of people, not just a few people who've actually woken up to that. And
thanks very much, Vanda. I think
that's all I've got to say anyway. Thanks very
you can
much.
come back later if you've got more to say.
No, thank you.
Thank you. I know exactly what you mean about hidden disabilities, and even with obvious disabilities, I can go around on my mobility scooter holding a pair of crutches, and people say, "Gosh, you do look well. You've been out in the sun. Have you been on holiday?" And you think, look. Anyway, now we've got Paul Collins to talk about the atmosphere of fear that surrounds any talk about disability. Thanks, Paul.
Evening, everyone. It's difficult to follow the last few people that spoken because it's been so good. Yes, Christine said it really follows on from the last two speakers, really. My book to do with PIP and Employment Support Allowance, ESA. Since the work capability assessment and the PIP assessment were introduced, there has been, certainly from my own personal experience, a climate of fear in the sense that we're now in a situation where every year, you sort of get one letter from the DEP, or maybe even two, and there's always that fear: is it just a rate change? I.e., every year they normally announce some sort of rate change, or is it one of the dreaded forms where you have to either where you're going to be reassessed for PIP, or in my case, I keep having to be reassessed for ESA every couple of years. And obviously the forms change slightly, and you can tell that when you look up advice for how to fill the forms in, you can tell that you start to discover that what you think a certain question means is actually very different to the way the DWP would argue it means. So you really do have to get advice and to know your stuff when you fill these forms in, and obviously because obviously the government has targets for how many people they want to get off this benefit each year for both PIP and ESA. So part of doing that is the way they write the questions and also the way they conduct the assessment process. And of course, the government have always said it's about helping disabled people to get the money they need. That's the line they put out. But the irony is that PIP, for instance, that's to help with your transport and care needs. Specifically, it's what replaced DLA. And part of the climate of fear is this: it's where if you decide to volunteer for something, you know, on a certain committee of a volunteer organisation, or you might actively be involved in a trade union, for instance, for an officer role, and you might think to yourself, if I do this, and this has happened, if I do this, will I lose my benefit, for instance? So the irony is that PIP is designed to enable you to do the things you want to do in society. But if you can do those kind of things, and the government would then take the money away from you. So it then means you can't do those sort of things that you weren't able to do before. Yeah, so I think that's my time up now. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much, Paul. You stuck to your time limit. That's great. Just one more speaker of our organised speakers, and that's Tony Hagger, who's going to talk about GP problems. Tony, you're a carer, aren't you?
Yeah. I'm a carer for my wife who's disabled. She's got several medical problems. So I'm talking about the NHS and GP surgeries. Now, we all come across in the news and we talk to people where people cannot get appointments, and it's all because of the privatisation going on. It's because you've got less doctors and more patients, lack of funding, and all the other issues that cause it. But for disabled people, it's as an extra issue with this broken system. In the case of my wife, she's got several medical issues. She's on lots of different medication, and the issue is getting consistency of care. And so sometimes it's a telephone call, other times it's an appointment. On her records, it says that she's a complex case and she should see a GP. She gets to the surgery and it happens to be a nurse practitioner or a trainee GP. So they start going through talking to her, and then they're stuck. And so they have to go and then find a GP, an experienced GP in the surgery, or try and get them on the phone. And then even if she gets sorted out, it's hard to get follow-up. And I think one of the biggest issues is that really the sick and disabled need to be seeing the same GP all the time so they can build up a relationship, so that doctor can, know what's wrong with them and treat them accordingly and be consistent. Another issue is, of course, is that because you're only maybe seeing, you're just not seeing the same doctor, nobody really gets to know the patient. And for a complex case that has not only medical issues, but it also comes to when there's an application for ESA or PIP, the DWP will write to the doctors to ask their opinion about this person. The thing is, the doctors don't know them, and because they only see them once every blue moon, and so what happens? It's a flawed system, and this contributes also to people not getting the support they need. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. I know exactly how you feel. We've got lots of problems in South East Kent with GP services. I think we've got the most patients per GP ratio, at least in the south. I'm not sure what it's like up north, but in the southeast, Thanet, which is where I live and several people here live, is doing really badly for GPs. It's almost impossible to get appointments, and they'll palm you off with anybody rather than the GP themselves. I'm now going to ask if Paula wants to come back now, commenting on some of those, or shall we take more contributions from the floor. Paula, what would you like to do? Do you want to come back right at the end, or do you want to?
Yeah, if I come back right at the end, because I'm taking notes as I'm going through with what people have said, and they're really interesting contributions. And also, I just want to say thank you to all the speakers. You spoke far better than me, and thank you from the bottom of my heart, because, you know, there's nothing more personal and more heart-wrenching than a personal testimony. Your bravery, you've done, you know, you've sharing that with all of us. I thank you very, very much for doing that. And you've got my full support and solidarity. And we'll do everything we can to try and support you going forwards with the issues you've raised. And just to let you know, you're not alone. You've got all of us here. Never forget that, okay? So I want to hear back from other people what you've got to say, and then I'll come back at the end. Chris,
Okay, thanks very much, Paula. I think one of the first people to put their hands up was Mike Higgins.
Higgins, but that's okay.
Higgins, sorry.
All right, Higgins is close enough. I should say to you, I'm a blind person, so do tell me when I've got 30 seconds left, otherwise I'll bang on for hours.
Okay.
I won't really, but I won't.
Can I just say I'm asking for people to contribute for 2 minutes from the floor.
Right, okay.
That's to give plenty of time.
That is okay. I really will need you to tell me in that case. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
No, thank you. I've been really impressed by the discussion tonight, and I want to say hi to Paula and to my old comrade Rory, whom I haven't spoken to for longer than I can possibly know. And if you want to unmute Rory, that's fine. But it's fantastic to hear both of you, but in particular my old comrade Rory, who was on the lines with me back in Dan in the 1990s, whom I have always had great respect for, and I really enjoyed both of your contributions this evening. Listen, they haven't got long, so I'm not going to say half or even a quarter of the things I would like to say. There is somebody unmuted, though. If they could mute, that would be really great, please. I don't know who it is, but there is somebody. Anyway, I'll bang on in case, and hopefully that. Yeah, thank you. Sounds like they've done it. So yes, one of the things I wanted to say was just to say I think we could possibly be enormously depressed after listening to all of the catalogue of attacks on disabled people and on carers and on those who are our allies across the UK and beyond, and all the attacks on disabled people we're seeing in Ukraine. And it's for sure that disability is a class issue. The biggest cause of impairment is poverty. So there's no debate, I hope, about that now, if there ever was. And certainly what I would say is, rather than being depressed, it's about how we defeat it. It's how we get organised to defeat it. And there are two things I want to say about that. Well, two and a lot more, but two I'll restrict myself to. The first one is, this week I was attending the TUC Disabled Workers Conference, and that was a vibrant meeting of socialists in the main, who passed a range of resolutions, none of which I think this group would disagree with. I can't think of one, actually. And they were all social model. I'll come to what that is in a moment. That's my second point, in their nature. And some of them were very, very, very political around class and around disability. And we supported things like the P&O workers. We supported the Ukrainian refugees, and we supported disabled people in a number of struggles across the UK. So disability is a political issue, as Rory pointed out at the very beginning. And I would urge those of you who are disabled people who are a member of a trade union who aren't involved to get involved in the structures within your union that are part of the disabled workers setup, because you can lobby for a range of issues within your organisation that will improve the lives of disabled people and other people as well, or your non-disabled colleagues. And the second point I wanted to make, and there's lots more I can say about that, but please do get in touch with me if you want to know more about that. The Disabled Workers TUC was a real fantastic event this week, actually, and we passed a charter of demands that we can place on employers that couldn't be described as being non-political, that's for sure. The second point I want to make, it really relates back to mainly what Rory was saying. And if I have a chance to ask a question, I would actually like to pose it mainly to Rory, actually, and that is, how do we take forward in the labour and trade union movement the demands that have emerged tonight and the issues that have emerged tonight in a constructive way? But the issue that I want to raise is around something called the social model. Forgive me if I'm teaching my parents to suck eggs or my sisters and siblings to suck eggs. But the social model of civility was developed by the disabled people's movement. If you really haven't come across it, and I imagine the majority here have, but if you haven't, please look it up. Look at the Union of Physically Impaired Against Segregation. Look at Finkelstein, because it analyzes in a Marxist context how, as labor units, disabled people were considered to be contributing less and less to the workforce, leading ultimately to us being seen as useless eaters or non-contributors by the Nazis. So disabled people are seen as not useful under capitalism. Now, a Trotskyist analysis of what we need is, as I think Rory hinted at. I will. Okay, thank you. As Rory, I'm nearly finished anyway. As Rory pointed out, not his words, mine. I should own them. But when you demand equality, it actually is demanding socialism. Because if you think of any demand that amounts to full accessibility and equal treatment of disabled people, whichever disabled people you're thinking of, capitalism has no interest in granting that unless and until we get rid of it. So that's why I would say, we need to look into and understand disability from a social context, not a medical context. It's not about what's wrong with me, what's wrong with you, what's wrong with your relatives or anything else. It's about what's wrong with society. How can we fix it? And actually, that's why disability should be at the forefront of the campaigns for equality, because we have more to gain by abandoning our chains, that perhaps, than any other group in society. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. There is quite a very good short film on the social model, which I was thinking of playing in this, but I think it's better to hear from people than to. Perhaps someone could put the link in the chat, so people who haven't seen it will be able to see it. I'm going to call in Jay Robinson next, because she was on my original list of speakers, and then I think she was poorly for a bit, so I dropped her off. But I'm going to bring her in now, if that's all right, Jay, with you.
What I was asked to do was to read a piece that I wrote in response to one of the brilliant articles that Christine had done in a Thanet newspaper. It's just about my experience sort of like recently. So I hope you'll bear with me. He said, life is great, stop whinging, and it's all right, you get loads kind of thing. So yeah, my response was, yes, life is so great being disabled, being left in a bed, gathering bed sores. The one on my bum is a 4 centimetre deep hole. Would you like one? Because life is so great being disabled. Also, don't forget the pleasure of being left lying in your own shit for hours between shifts, anything between 12 and 19 hours. The times that you manage to get into your wheelchair involves an overnight sleeping in my chair. My maximum was 5 days. And don't forget being rushed to hospital with sepsis and osteomyelitis because one of your bedsore collection became infected, and having a couple of doctors come to you as you wait for a bed to tell you that they've put a DNR on your records simply because you're disabled. I did shout after them and gave them a few factors of the human rights act on that one. And it's all at the best courtesy. Euthanasia at its best. Courtesy of the NHS.
Sorry, Jay, your sound's going a bit odd. Can you hold the microphone nearer to you, perhaps?
Yeah. So the euthanasia at its very best, courtesy of the NHS. So with the sores, the infections, the shitty nappies, and never knowing which stranger is going to walk through your door to get you up at 11 o'clock and put you to bed at 7, having lost a significant budget when the ILF was passed over to local authorities, who spent it as they like. Oops. Hang on, sorry about this, I've lost my spot. There it is. Having lost a significant budget when the ILF was passed over to local authorities, who cut your 79 hours assessed direct payments to pay for carers down to 14 hours per week maximum. Life as a disabled woman is pretty fantastic. Would you like to swap places? Yeah, I think mention being.
Jay, your sound is fading a bit. Shall I call someone else in and then you can come back later if you like?
It's all right. It's because I put it down to rest. P.S. I didn't mention being in prison for 2 years, in care homes to hospital to care home during COVID, as positive patients were also sent into the same care homes. Is it any wonder that a greater number of disabled and vulnerable people died? Great way to get rid of useless disabled people. Boris has bettered Adolf Hitler in the euthanasia of disabled people. Hitler's total around 80,000. Boris and the Tories, 250,000 plus. Great legacy for Great Britain. Nevertheless, being disabled is still bloody fantastic in the eyes of narrow-minded Dick Watts, which is what he was. That was it. That's what you asked me to read. And that's what you asked me to read.
Jay, if you could put that on our Facebook page, that would be brilliant as well. I'm going to call in John Gibson, who is my rival on the hospital waiting list, I'm afraid. So
I'm going to try and mute this now.
John.
Okay. Thank you, Christine, and thank you to all of the other contributors that we've heard so far. Obviously, not least of which Paula and many of the others. And I'll just refer to something that Paula mentioned earlier: the changing of energy rates on the 31st of March. And what I'm suggesting that people make a note in their diaries or whatever to do is to read your meters on the 31st of March and submit your reading to your energy supplier on that day, so that you don't end up paying the new rate for energy that you've consumed during the time up to that date. So you pay so that cuts that off. My own position, and I'll just talk briefly about that. I'm fortunate in that it's nowhere near as bad as some of those that we've heard this evening. Is that I was removed from ESA a few months ago and put on JSA, Job Seekers Allowance, in spite of the fact that I need the aid of crutches to move about, and I'm limited about how far I can move about due to my health condition. Of course, the JSA that I was kindly receiving of just £36 a week, that comes to an end within the next 3 or 4 weeks. So it'll be a trying time after that. I note that people have talked about the Tories being hostile, having created a hostile environment for disabled people. I don't believe that during the time of Labour being in power, or Labour in opposition over much of the last decade, has done a great deal to change that. I remember particularly the current Shadow Chancellor, who made statements about people on benefits, and basically said that Labour will represent working people, but it doesn't seem to have any concern for those of us who, through no fault of our own, have to depend on state benefits to survive. So we are in direct victims of that hostile environment that is perpetrated by the ruling elite, whether they be the elite in the Tory party who are interested in enriching themselves, or the elite in the Labour Party, who again are principally involved in securing their own power.
Can you wind up, John, please?
Okay, so I note typically that there are that in other countries, disabled people are given priority and are singled out for support in public places. So, for instance, when I was away a few weeks ago, I found that as a disabled person, I was prioritised in the supermarket and encouraged to open up another till. They'd open up another till to serve me, so that I didn't suffer extra agony while I waited for a till to come free. Whereas in the UK, when a till in a supermarket this afternoon, I find that another till is opened, and of course other customers, being more able-bodied, are effectively steal my place in the queue, and I end up further back, having approached a newly opened checkout.
John, I need to stop you so we can bring other people in. Sorry. And things are better in Broadstairs than Margate. Sorry about that. I'm going to bring in Kate Adams, please. Just 2 minutes, if you don't mind. Otherwise, we won't have time for anything.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me? Have I unmuted myself properly?
Yes, you're fine.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah. So when I was 34, I became disabled with ME, and it was like a complete life changer. And I still have it. During the pandemic, I got much worse. And before that, I've been functioning quite well, actually, for some time and actually working. The impact it had on my life made me realize what other people have been saying, is that society actually should be set up for the needs of all people instead of capitalism. And actually, we're all disabled people. It can happen to any of us at any time. I wanted to say, just support what John said about the Labour Party, because when I became disabled, I set up a campaign called Incapacity Action to fight what was called then the All Work test, which is similar to the test that is in place now. And we saw many Labour politicians who all said, as resources allow, in terms of scrapping this system. And the only people that supported us were Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell, who would have scrapped the work capability test. I just wanted to add something about the situation for immigrant people and this whole concept of fraudulence about pretending to be disabled. Because I campaigned for about 10 years on this issue. Then I moved to Kent. I was still very disabled, but I started visiting immigration detainees. And from that point, I actually set up a charity with other people and managed to get a job supporting people in prison. But those people, the majority migrants in that situation, are not entitled to any of these benefits. The most they can get is £39 a week. Many of them no recourse to public funds. Recently, I was at a Zoom, and many of them have mental health issues and trauma and other disabilities because of their situation. I was at a Zoom meeting at a psychiatric hospital, and I was saying at that meeting that the impact of possible deportation was a strong factor in my clients' mental health issues and suicidal ideation and approaching breakdown. And I saw afterwards a consultant had written that they were considering whether he was malingering. So this whole thing of fraudulence, spreads. And it's a disgrace because actually it's the system that's fraudulent. And finally, I want to just say something about work, that I think unwaged work should be acknowledged and counted. And this pressure to get people into capitalist type jobs, it's all about supporting capitalism. I have a friend with mental health issues, this really talented artist, and he was saying to me a week ago, I feel a failure. He's 55, I feel a failure. I'm never going to work. And I said, you're working already, but your work isn't recognized. And we have to change that whole thing. It's part of changing the world. So thanks for listening to me.
Thanks very much, Kate. That point about disabled immigrants is really important because they probably get neglected more than anyone because they don't have anyone to speak up for them particularly. I think we need to finish by 8 o'clock. Shall I just bring in one more person and then we'll go back to Paula, if you don't mind? I'm going to bring in Halima because she doesn't speak at meetings very much and this is her chance. Halima, can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, sorry, I took a bit longer. I just want to say thank you for giving me the opportunity. I'm not.
Can you
I'm
turn
not
your
a good
camera on,
speaker.
please?
No, no, I'm not comfortable with that. And I'm sorry, I have to apologize to the room. I just want to
That's
say,
okay. Don't worry. Keep it off.
everybody that you are all inspiring me, and especially Paula, Christine, Wanda. I just want to add a little bit on when I used to work as a care agency. It's unfair and how agencies give you like small time limit to care for the patient. Some of them will give you 15 minutes, 20 minutes, and you can't get everything done. And then you have to move on to the next one. And if you try to do your job properly and you finish that person, to take care for them and do everything you can, and then you end up getting late to the next patient, next person that you're supposed to care, and you let that person down, and then you go back and then you get blamed for it. So I just wanted to highlight that bit. And also I just want to add Kate Adams for the migrant issues. She's absolutely right. And the Tory government also, I'm all over the place. I'm trying to get a sense of Tory, and we shouldn't let the Tory government get away with the thousands and thousands of disabled people that committed suicide because of their cuts, because of and discrimination. And there's someone else who said about Labour Party. Labour Party is as bad as the Tories. I joined Labour Party to fight for social justice, mental health, social housing, and anti-racism and anti-war, and the current leader doesn't represent none of those things. I just want to say you're all inspiring. Sorry, English is not my first. I'm also dyslexic. So thank you for putting up with me, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Halima, and thanks for having the courage to come on. I think we should go back to Paula now. There are still a few people with their hands up. So Paula, do you want to come back in, and then if we've got any time left at the end, we'll go to the people still with their hands up.
Right, we'll start with Jenny. You know, Deepak's demand, Black Triangle's demand, the WOW campaign, and many other disabled people's campaigners always bring to scrap the work capability assessment, bring the assessments back in-house, and allow our doctors to assess us. The thing is, with this crap government, that's not going to happen. But you know what we have done, I think, and it's important to stress, is highlight the horrendous cruelty the work capability has put people through. We've taken the government to court, and I think it's important to highlight the wins when the Mental Health Resistance Network highlighted Regulation 35. You know, that if you have suicide ideation or attempt, that the assessors and the DWP have to take that into consideration. What a lot of people, I think what's important with PIP and you know, the actual forms themselves is to, if you can, is to highlight how your conditions fluctuate day to day. So what you're like in the morning to what you're like in the afternoon to what you're like in the evening. And if you can't repeat an action, you need to put that down. Does it cause you pain? Does it cause you distress? Are you exhausted after doing it? These are the things that the assessors actually do look out for, is the pain and the fatigue and the distress. And it's really, really important to do that. And with PIP and ESA, they're looking at how your conditions affect you at 5 days out of 7. So it's really important. And also you can have family members write personal statements and keep a diary of how your condition impacts on you literally throughout the day. You can submit that as evidence with your PIP and ESA questionnaires and everything like that. Going on to GPs in the NHS, sad to say, I'm afraid we're not going to see family doctors anymore, or the continuity of care. I'm afraid that's gone. You know, we're going to actually see, I think you're going to see more of healthcare healthcare assistants, paramedics, you know, nursing practitioners, to make way for doctors. We're actually seeing doctors replaced by healthcare assistants. When I was asthmatic in January, I actually asked the healthcare assistant to listen to my chest, because I really was struggling to breathe. And she actually turned around and said she wasn't qualified to do that. I had to wait another 8 weeks to see a nurse to listen to my chest. And that is something I think we really do need to highlight and really push the government off. Obviously, we're involved in the campaign Scrap the NHS Bill, which is the Health and Social Care Bill. It's a nasty piece of legislation. And as I said earlier, it's about literally eroding treatment, eroding patient safety, and it's the de-skilling of staff, and it's sweeping cuts. And it's got to be said, actually, that the government actually denied the Health and Social Care Department £20 billion. So the government, the NHS have now got to find £20 billion. Well, they're going to be cutting £20 billion off their budget. So God knows what that's going to mean in the terms of patient care. It's catastrophic, basically. Going back to going on to hidden disabilities, I myself have hidden disabilities. I do use equipment, but I get fed up all the time of saying, oh, you look really well. Well, you can't see pain, you can't see inflammation, you can't often see tiredness. But when I'm really red, it's because I'm really hot and I'm flaring. So it's not to say I look really well, actually, I feel really shit. And that's what you need to say to people when you get that crap. It's judgment, it shows lack of understanding and lack of education, and it's really ridiculous. Going back into, you know, it's so important. We work very closely with the unions, actually, and I was a keynote speaker at the TUC Disabled Workers Conference, but I remember when we got back in 2013, we got the Disabled Workers Conference to come and block a road with us around the bedroom tax. I'll never forget the president of the TSSA looking behind him, and he was holding up a number 24 bus, and he didn't know what nerve was going on, but he still talks about it. You know, everything that happens to us is political. The politics is personal and it's ideological. And we've really got to get that out to the wider public, that no one's immune from being disabled. No one. You can become ill tomorrow. You know, you can have a life-changing accident. You can have a breakdown at your desk, as what happened to me. Yeah, no one's immune from that. And also, no one is immune from losing their job and needing to claim into the welfare, into the benefit system, as what's going on with those, what's happening to those poor 800 P&O workers right now, and the shit way they're treated. So solidarity to the P&O workers, because many of them are probably going to have to claim universal credit right now and go through the horrors of the benefit system for the first time. And what the way they were treated was shit. But it's also a very sinister thing happening here. We're seeing the ramping up of hiring and firing and rehiring. We're seeing a ramping up of precarious work and 0 hours, and we are going back decades on workers' rights. And that includes disabled people who also bore an awful lot of the job cuts during the pandemic. It needs to be stressed. What we're seeing with social care is absolutely horrific. And obviously with Brexit, and the government stopped the freedom of movement, that's had a horrendous impact on, and there's a huge shortage of personal assistants and also social workers and care workers, not only in community care but in the NHS. And that's having a horrendous impact on disabled people getting the support that they so need. And it also, you know, we're also campaigning for NHS staff to get, you know, the 15% increase in pay. You know, because many of them, you know, many nurses and everything are using food banks to eat. So, you know, that's really important to stress. Going back to energy, yeah, take your meter readings on the 31st and make sure that the energy companies don't diddle you. But on the 1st, if you can support the big power off campaign that Sheffield DPAC have got, that would be really supportive. But we also know that a lot of disabled people use equipment and everything, can't do that. But just share the links as far as you can. Trying to cover as much as I can. What I would say to you is, what is important now is solidarity, okay? I thank you from the bottom of my heart yet again for everything you shared with me, that you've asked me to come and speak to me. You've asked me to come and speak to you all tonight, you know, it means a great deal. But what was really important from this meeting for me was hearing from all of you, because that meant more to me than anything, especially for some of you who don't get to speak at meetings a lot and don't get to get your stories told. We need to make sure disabled people's voices are amplified at every meeting, on every big platform across the country, but also showing solidarity globally to disabled people who are going through horrendous oppression, horrendous discrimination. And we pay solidarity to disabled people in Ukraine, Palestine, Somalia, Libya, Afghanistan, Iraq, who are going through absolute hell in civil war conflict, and also dreadful conflict, who can't escape these horrendous conflict and paying a dreadful price with their lives. We must amplify those voices as well and get that out into the wider media, because it's always the case with us here in the UK, but in the wider global arena, disabled people's voices are often forgotten, and we must never, ever, ever allow that to happen. So I'm going to shut up there if you've got time to talk, but if you want to stay in contact with me, if you make note of these details, I'm Paula Peters on Facebook. You'll see a picture of me, someone did a drawing. My cover photo is me leading the library workers in Bromley down the road. They were going to march on the pavement. I got them in the road dodging the cops. So there's a picture of me on there. I'm at Paula Peters and the number 2 on Twitter. If you are on Twitter, you can follow me on there. And make a note of the DPAC website, www.dpac.uk.net. There's loads of DPAC groups across the country. You can join as a member, and DPAC do offer support if you want help to get to protests, but they're always looking for people's personal stories, right? You've got opportunities to share your stories in written format, in video, however you can. Share your story, because there's no other voice important than all of yours. Thank you very much for having me on tonight. It's been great talking to you all, and I hope to see you all again soon.
I wish I could make the sound of applause. Thank you very much. That was fantastic. Paula is on our Facebook group, the Socialist Disability Group. So there's a chance to carry on the conversation there. But we've come up to 8 o'clock, and I can see there are still people with their hands up, in particular Tony Greenstein. I would recommend that everyone reads Tony's blog this week, because he's done a brilliant article based around this meeting, but summarising a lot of the main issues. Thank you all very much for coming. I'm really sorry we didn't bring in everybody, but you know, people grumble a lot about meetings that overrun, and everyone gets tired, especially if you've got the kind of conditions that a lot of us have at the moment. So can I thank everybody? And next time, perhaps, I did send an email invite to Vicky Foxcroft, who's the Shadow Disability Minister, and she said she was really sorry she couldn't come this time, but she'd be happy to come to another public meeting. So maybe I'd invite Paula to come along as well, and we could get a real kind of debate going. What do you think? Shall we do that? Let's get some availability from her. I mean, I don't want to be aggressive about this, but who's heard anything that she's done recently? Okay. Is everyone okay about me finishing the meeting now? We've got opportunities to come together again. Let's do it again soon. And let's invite some people who really should be listening to us more carefully than other people are. So thanks very much, Paula. Thanks for Rory for starting off the meeting, and thanks everybody for taking part. I'll say
Many
goodbye.
thanks, everyone. Well done.
You can all go and have your tea now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Christine. Appreciate it.
The meeting will be recorded, so there will be a recording of it available on various Facebook pages as soon as we found out how to trim it a bit and put titles on it and things. John Gibson, you may be able to help me with that. Okay, I'm off now. Thanks very much.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye,
Thanks,
everyone.
Paula.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Christine.
Hi, Christine. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.